Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. You're speaking us to with us right here from the FYNB TV studios, and I'm coming back again with you. I am the host for our Women Leading Change Now, our United Nations Parallel event, and we are going to be speaking this year on Goal 13, which is climate change. I have with me today a very, very extremely dynamic woman. She comes to me out of Chicago, Illinois. That's in the United States of America. And her name is LaShondra Graves. She is the apartment lady. And the things that she's doing in the city of Chicago, we're going to find out about that. She's going to tell us a little bit about what's going on around the United States. And the topic that she's going to be addressing on is going to be on facing housing issues before and after climate change. And she is very well poised to do that because Chicago is one of those, it's one of those northern cities in the United States, if you're not familiar with exactly where it is. But what it sits is four seasons. It goes through summer, winter, fall, and spring. And so they have to prepare, unprepare, and they have to address all these different things and be prepared for the changes that come all year, every year. And now on top of that, the climate is actually changing. So I'm going to sit back and you're going to sit back and we're going to listen and let her tell us, how can we face these issues that we have, especially in regards to housing. So, LaShondra, I'm going to give you the microphone and let you take it away.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. And yes, I am the apartment lady. I have the registered trademark for the apartment lady in the United States. I'm also the founder of Apartment and Housing Rentals Foundation. We're a 501c3 organization, and we've been doing second chance rental and eviction prevention for over 7 years. And so when I first started Apartment and Housing Rentals Foundation, it was just me helping people find apartments, and these people were high-risk renters. So I had started a group on Facebook back in 2014, and like 6 months later, there were about 8,000 people in the group. And so I noticed that trends started popping up because some of the people in the group say they need an apartment. And they say, oh, I need a 2-bedroom for $2,500 or $1,200. And you know that's the market rent range for Chicago. So that means they know how much they can pay for rent and they're making the money. And then there's other people saying, oh, I need to rent with an eviction, or are there any private landlords, or would somebody rent to me with a 560 credit score? And I saw that no one was taking care of them. So the people who were considered high-risk renters, they were there and they stayed there for months. And so I just started helping them individually, one by one. As I started helping them, more trends started popping up in my mind. I'm like a number person. I'm a systematic person. And so I look for these different trends. And so more trends started popping up. So as I started helping them one by one, I realized these people were evicted because they didn't know their rights.
Oh.
And yes, no one knew
their
rights. And I said to myself, when I got my first apartment, nobody told me, Chandra, girl, you better learn your tenant's rights before you sign that lease. Nobody told me that. Nobody tell you that. And obviously, one of the parts of growing up and taking on more responsibility as yourself as an adult is to get shelter. Shelter is a necessity. We're not built to weather the elements like that. And so everyone should know what the rules and laws are in their states or in their country, even when it comes to renting. So now all of these trends started popping up, and that's when the foundation was actually built. Because instead of just helping people find apartments, I decided to educate them. I needed them to know why they were evicted in the first place. And because I didn't want them to have to come back to me the next time they needed to move. I wanted to empower them. So then the tenants rights classes came out, and I had to study all of the tenants rights for every single state at one point, because now we are helping in every single state. So now that's a whole bunch of research. Research is in very, very, very important. So then we started noticing other trends. It was about their finances. A person could have $100,000 as an annual income and still be evicted because they didn't know how to budget or manage their finances. And so that's another part I want to say, that's another issue that renters have, because most renters are, making the hourly wage and so forth, and pretty much living check to check. So I'll get into these numbers in a minute. But then I started noticing, okay, you have the money, but you don't know how to use it. Now, don't get me wrong, the market rent has outpriced the minimum wage workers, and so majority of Apartment Housing Rentals Foundation members, they fall under the middle class, or the middle wage, for lack of the word that's escaping me. However, so the market rent has already outpriced minimum wage. But most of these people, they're making minimum wage, so they're trying to figure out how to make a $2,000 income for a family of four. So in a family of four may need a 3-bedroom or a 2-bedroom. A market rent let's see, in Chicago, the medium rent for a 2-bedroom is about $1,200. So now you think $1,200, that's 60% of their income already going toward rent. And then they have to pay their utilities, they have their internet bill, cell phone bill, job expenses, because they have to pay to travel to work. By the time all of the money, by the time they pay all of their bills, they're behind. They're negative $100 to $200. And then I started noticing that the trends that we noticed was people would rather pay the smaller bills and leave the bigger bill behind, which is the rent. That's their shelter. Without the shelter, the smaller bills doesn't matter. Food doesn't matter, lights doesn't matter, heat doesn't matter, because you don't have that actual shelter.
Well, I'm gonna question you there. You said that people will pay their smaller bills before paying their rent. Is that because they don't feel that, or they think that, well, the apartment owner or company will not put them out, or doesn't won't turn them away or something? I mean, how is that?
No, they just feel like that bigger bill can actually get work up to getting the money. And they also feel like, okay, it's a bigger bill, so it's going to be harder for, like you said, the apartment owner to put them out.
And that generally doesn't, that plays itself out in about 6 months.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, well, it plays itself out in less than 6 months today, because big property managers, especially in Chicago, they're managing most of the South Side and the West Side. So the neighborhoods, the impoverished neighborhoods, these big property managers are managing most of those properties. And what they did with these property managers managing the properties for the landlords, it took the moral aspect out of this rental process. So now everything is in black and white. So the moment you don't pay your rent, you're in eviction court the next month. And in eviction court the next month. And so they have so much money. to employ so many attorneys that it only takes them a couple months now to evict you.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So yeah. So now that becomes the issue. Well, I mean, how then? Okay. So what are they doing? How are they addressing this? I mean, especially um, coming up on. I remember I did live in Chicago for about 23 years, and I remember something like where they couldn't turn the heat off, after October 31st or something like that, or
Mhm.
there was a lot of different things that were in that. It seemed that there, Chicago, New York, Minneapolis, they kind of had in place, city, Lansing, cities in those areas, all the way up to Maine, they had in place that for people to kind of address, from a climate change standpoint. Okay, the weather's changing, we know, and it's going to be harder for people, and especially in some of the areas that were rural areas, like rural Michigan,
Right.
rural Maine. A
Right.
lot of people depended on seasonal work, to get their to renew their coffers.
Right.
They did construction work, or they did factory work, and sometimes the factories or whatever were closed at certain times of year. So there were things put in place to abate that. So how do we do it today? When I heard one thing you said, I probably kind of cherry picked it out. You said the moral fiber is gone. So how do we now address, climate changing, the normal climate changing, and then the major, Earth climate changing, and how do we, keep people in houses or keep people getting housing?
Well, okay, that is a great question because the first thing they want to do, and the first thing that ends up happening in the government, in the laws in every state, is they want to raise the minimum wage. Now, don't get me wrong, raising the minimum wage is great because a living wage, minimum wage, it takes two minimum wage incomes to actually make a living wage. And so raising minimum wage is great, but that does not suffice or remedy the housing situation. And so to answer this question, I just want to take you back to, I'm going to show you, compare what's going on today. So in 2016, there were 2.6 million evictions filed in 2016. And all of this information came from the eviction lab. This was a lab that was created by Purdue University. And so the eviction lab started getting that information and putting all of the eviction information together in 2016. So then they started reporting all of that data. And in 2016, 2.6 million people, over 2.6 million people were in eviction court. And then 900,000, and I don't want to say 900,000 people, I want to say 900,000 households were evicted. This was across the United States. So then that trend just kept rising. But then we come to 2020, where we have this pandemic, and now the whole rental industry, 40 million people or so, are facing evictions because of these different eviction moratoriums and these stay-at-home orders, and the loss of income, and the job, the unemployment rates, and things like that. So now we have 40 million people. The
Mm-hmm.
the pandemic, the only thing the pandemic did was make the problem rise to the surface. So I want to paint that picture before I answer this question. What do they need to do to start tackling this homelessness and this eviction crisis that we are right in the middle in right now? There's lack of affordable housing. There's lack of affordable housing. I mean, if you and what and I'm saying, and I've been saying it through this conversation, the market rent has outpriced minimum wage. Chicago, a 2-bedroom apartment, $1,200. California, a median 2-bedroom apartment, $2,500. Okay, and their minimum wage is what? $14, $15. So how can a family of three afford $2,500 a month?
Well, is it that the developers, the real estate developers, those who build housing, um, that they don't want to build housing for that can be at an affordable, that can be actually rented and or sold at an affordable rate? Is that an issue that we might need to be looking at and addressing? Because I mean, it sounds, when you're talking about building, you can build a house and price it accordingly. You can build a structure, I should say, and you can price that structure accordingly to that marketplace, because we have had affordable housing before throughout the whole United States. But now you're saying, it sounds like we don't want to have affordable housing
No.
in our cities and states. What drives that force where you don't want to have that, when we come from a time, an era when we built large structures? We built, what there in Chicago alone, you built structures that, I mean, it may not have the programs, may have disintegrated, like the Cabrini Greens and, the Henry Horner and all those different things like that. I get that, but I mean, now the lessons learned would say, when you build those now, you build them differently and you manage them differently. And with all this new management, with all this new technology, and I mean, we're graduating PhDs and scientists, literally by the hundreds of thousands every day. Why is it that we're trying to outprice it, or, for lack of a better term, pretend as though we don't have people who are at the lower rungs?
That's a good question. Let me tell you, the rental industry is not regulated. Now, don't get me wrong. This is an industry that's been around for centuries. I mean, at least 100 years in the United States, people were renting. It's not regulated. So in 2008, when we had the housing market crash and everyone lost their homes, the rental industry really saw a boom. So in 2009, it's not regulated. They were able to charge whatever they want. It's about supply and demand, and that's what drives that market rent. It has nothing to do with what someone, if you have a impoverished neighborhood and the median income is minimum wage, so about $2,000, $2,400 a month, you would think that in that neighborhood, the rental prices would be decently priced so that the people can, quote unquote, pay 40% of their income. No, it's about supply and demand, and there are no regulations. There are no regulations in the rental industry in the United States. So from 2019,
when you say no regulations, how can that be? How can it be that you actually have an industry of this nature and it be unregulated? Are you saying they don't follow the regulations, or are you truly saying there are no regulations, or there are no caps, or are we really speaking and saying there are no caps and no rental caps and moratoriums?
It's not. There are the rental industry. What we have for the rental industry is the RTLOs, that's the residential tenant and landlord ordinances. Those are laws that was put into play to protect the landlord and the tenant, because they have to go into a lease, which is a contract. Outside of that, the landlord can charge whatever he wants. The landlord can charge a security deposit. As soon as they came up with as soon as they put a law into place, they come up with other laws, or they come up with ways to go around it. So there used to be the security deposit used to be your deposit. So when you get an apartment, you pay a security deposit, and that deposit was to sit there in case you damage the unit. And then the landlord can take the money out of the deposit and return the rest of the deposit to you. So if you damage the unit beyond normal wear and tear. Now, the government tried to regulate the security deposit, by making the landlords, or requiring the landlords to hold security deposits and interest-bearing savings accounts, and actually give the tenant that interest, whether it was $1, $2, $3, they were required to do that. And if they didn't do that, they had penalties and fines to pay. And if they didn't return the tenant's security deposit, the tenant can go after them in small claims court and actually get double that security deposit. Well, what did the rental industry do? They implemented move-in fees, non-refundable move-in fees. So there are no laws connected to non-refundable move-in fees. So the non-refundable move-in fees replace the security deposit that actually have laws connected to it.
Okay. So like I was saying, okay. So the laws are there, but the rental industry, that's where we get into that one question I was asking you about the morals, how the moral fiber has come out. And so basically what they are doing is they're finding a way to come out of this, and to in a way that it is truly immoral, but they find ways around it. They found a key as to how I can get around this. So instead of calling it what is on the books as a regulation, a security deposit, now I'll just refer to this as a move-in fee. And so therefore, if you go after me with the law, the true, not the spirit of the law, but the literalness of the law, it would say, this is a move-in, that was a move-in fee that I received from you. That was not a security deposit.
Yes. And the move-in fee is non-refundable.
Right.
So then you have, the tenant's rights. The Fair Housing Act, that was enacted in 1968. Dr. Martin Luther King, he fought for the Fair Housing Act, and after he was killed, they actually, as a momentum, enacted the Fair Housing Act. No one has moved on that. You don't see the Fair Housing Act being implemented, in the rental industry. And I'm talking about in, no state. Now, don't get me wrong.
What would the Fair Housing Act actually give? What would it do as far as, making a difference in these different things we're looking at?
Well, then the Fair Housing Act will prevent all of the discrimination. It will prevent the discrimination that's being, gosh, I'm so sorry, you guys. I have so much in my head and I want to say so much, but let me say it as clearly as possible. It'll prevent the discrimination. I know most leases and apartment application, they have snippets of the Fair Housing Act where it's saying you can't discriminate by race, or you can't discriminate by income. You can't discriminate, if someone is handicapped. They have those momentum discrimination clauses in there. But then they discriminate anyway. They discriminate by, okay, the requirements of the apartment. So if you're in a neighborhood, and this is all over the United States, if you're in the neighborhood and you know that the median credit score in that neighborhood is about 580, if you want to discriminate, then you say the requirements for that apartment is you have to have a 620 credit score. They find ways to discriminate. And so if you're in an area and you know that the median income is 30,000, you discriminate by saying, okay, the requirements for my property is my rent is 2,500. That's someone's whole income. But if you want to discriminate, that's what they do. They just change the requirements for the apartments.
So I guess my question then, it still remains, what would the Fair Housing Act do? Because the Fair is do say in that instance, if we kept it right there, narrow, targeted, focused against someone coming into an area, would the Fair, I guess, let me ask the question this way, let me reframe it. Would the Fair Housing Act set a moratorium that says if the median income is X in a particular area, then you can't come in and provide housing or charge more than what this area can actually absorb? So, certain areas that you have, it, like you said, it has a certain median income. So therefore, no matter what you have in there, you can't charge over what that median income can actually absorb. Would the Fair Housing Act address that? Could an attorney litigate with that as a, as his going forward statement?
No, unfortunately, no, not in the state that it's in. As I said, the Fair Housing Act hasn't been changed or no amendments since it was enacted. Now, there were slight amendments like handicap, and they added what races were protected under the Fair Housing Act, but they didn't add really laws. And so had they been working with the Fair Housing Act alongside the rental industry, then all of those things would have come into place. Now, what you just described is rent control. No landlord, no developer, no investor wants to hear that term, rent control, because they don't even know what rent control is. When they think of rent control, they're thinking of how New York did their rent control, where you couldn't raise the rent.
Right.
And then the rents remained there for years, 30 years, 50 years. That's not rent control. The rent control that I envision or that I see, because they don't have a real definition for rent control, so they're scared of it. The rent control that I envision is if you go into a certain neighborhood because the data is available and you want to buy property in a certain neighborhood, you have to understand this is the median income.
Right.
You can't put people out or charge over 50% of the median income in that neighborhood. Now, that to me is rent control. And I think that if the Fair Housing Act would have remained at the forefront of the rental industry, eventually we would have came to some equitable solution that would have prevented what you see now. And that's the market rent outpriced the minimum wage. And
is it possible then? Okay, I know what you're saying. These things could have happened. Okay. Past, present, future. Let's go into the future with this. Okay. Can these, since the Fair Housing Act is still on the books, it's still there, it's still alive, may not be working for us. Okay. And we see historically what, these things not being in place, what it has done to us.
Mhm.
So now would it be a good time to put this in front of some attorneys, some groups, and say, okay, we need you to go and to lobby, and this is what we need as an amendment to the Fair Housing Act. I mean, we've done that throughout our history in this country. We have done that, and that's why there's so many different 15, 20, 30, 40 amendments to several different of the laws that were first put in place. I mean, going forward in the future, is that something we could do?
Most definitely. Most definitely. And they've been blocking it. You know what? This is not a conspiracy theory. Um, the rental industry in the United States brought in from 2009 to 2019 $4 trillion, over $4 trillion in 10 years. Who's going to want to give up that money and that power? And so when when people protest today, like they're protesting against the evictions, they're not even thinking about the Fair Housing Act. It doesn't even get brought into the equation. And so you're 100% right. If we put the Fair Housing Act on the table and find where we can make the amendments to the Fair Housing Act, I think right away we can start remedying. We can come up with a remedy for even this eviction crisis that's happening right now.
Okay. I like that. And I like the fact that also I want to throw this and put this on the lap of the apartment lady. And that is because she's the one, is people like her, people who sit in that seat of, I care about people. I feel it is my responsibility to do something about issues that are out there that are facing them. And one of the things that I do want to put on her plate is this. If you can move things, you can move the needle in several different ways. You can move it one way or the other. The pendulum swings both ways. You can either move it against the grain or you can move it with the grain. Against the grain would be, as she is saying, and that is to go to the existing housing industry, the housing market, and hope that you can get them to not lobby against you to put laws in act that would put rental controls in and that would hamper and stymie their some 4 trillion plus income that they're actually receiving. Now that's letting the pendulum swing against the grain. What I'd like to see is, I'd like to put this out there on her plate, and that is, let the pendulum swing with the grain. And that is, go out to those people, and we have new millennial who are coming into the market, into the housing development market, and want to develop housing. And they have several different setups and several different innovative ways in order to develop housing and put housing. Have them to develop affordable housing that is specifically affordable housing.
Right.
In going into those areas that are depleted, where the income is lower, and building houses there, because they're in putting building the houses and apartment complexes in those specific areas, or even if you build out into new areas, but build affordable housing communities and really target that. And if there is any pushback in those different communities with that coming in, that's when you bring in the Fair Housing Act, and you say you put an amendment on here. In these areas, we're now outpricing the people. And what I will say to the industry is this: that industry that would step forward, that portion of the housing developers, of the developing market that would come forward to do that, you will be very well received. Your conference will be very well addressed, because why? With climate change, with the pandemic, with all these things that we have coming in, with the market, with the number of people who are trained or who can be trained that move over into the new high tech areas, those people that are not able to move over into the high tech areas, you are going to have so many people who will fall into that area of needing that affordable housing that maybe today they are with those two incomes and paying that $2,500, $3,500 a month rent, but they're going to fall off into that where they have to have something that's $1,000 or that's $500 or that's $200 or something or what have you, as far as rental is concerned. So you're going to have more people. That number is going to grow exponentially, is already growing exponentially, and we're seeing that because during the pandemic, one of the numbers and one of the data, we collected data on everything during the pandemic, and even more so, we went data collection on steroids. The
Oh,
data,
wow.
the Census Bureau data collected data during the pandemic, and it showed the number of people who actually left their houses, left their homes, left their housing, their apartments, and went to live with others. And guess what? Did not come back because they can't afford to. So those people, but they do want to have their own apartment. They do want to have their own homes. So there is a huge growing market for that whole housing, affordable housing. And I'm going to leave it there. And I'm going to have my guest, LaShondra Graves, the apartment lady. I'm going to let her have the last word, on this facing housing issues before and after climate change.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, you guys, housing has always been an issue, and it's an issue in every single country. I mean, each country has a different set of issues when it comes to housing, but we all have housing issues. And it's all about being the only way that we can remedy these issues is come up with equitable ways to work with each other. Don't get me wrong, it's the rental industry, and I'm focusing on the rental industry and the housing. Just if you're a homeowner that's in the process of losing your property, the housing industry is a pure profit industry. You guys, you have to understand that it's a pure profit industry. Although it's housing or shelter is a necessity, the industry is a pure profit industry. And the only way that we can move the needle, as Yvonne said, just even a little, is we have to find equitable ways to work with each other. Now, if a developer is developing a property, let's say on the west side of Chicago, and of course, they could, they're putting the money in, maybe they're doing it sustainable, renewable. They're putting all green material into this building. And so they want to take the cost of purchasing the property, they want to take the cost of renovating the property, and they want to make a profit. They have to understand that if you put that property on the west side of Chicago in one of the impoverished neighborhoods, the people will not be able to pay the rent. Yes, if you want to make a huge profit, because the profit margin for the rental industry today is about 40 to 50%. And that's on a medium margin. You can't focus on making that type of margin in an area that is historically poor. And so, everyone, yes, I want everyone to do everything green. So you have to figure out how you can provide that building or those properties and yes, provide a decent property without, lack of a better word, without draining the people's pockets, because it takes the whole world. Everyone matters. So in the United States, the people that are ringing up your products at a Walmart, the people that are cleaning the rooms at a Hyatt Regency, the people that are serving you at a Portillo, we need those people. They actually matter. And we found out during the pandemic that those people became essential workers. So they are important. We need the minimum wage workers, as well as we need, the C-suite executives. They all matter. So when those minimum wage workers are homeless and they're forced to live with another family in a 2-bedroom apartment, and so you're moving three families and 3 rooms, then their work ethics, they're going to change. Why do you think they're not? They don't want to come back to work, because their mental health is already been affected by the fact that they have been put out and they don't have their own roof. They cannot provide shelter for themselves or their family. So now what happens? The industries that profit off the minimum wage workers, now you're short staffed. And you're seeing this. You're seeing the effects of this right now with the unemployment rate. People don't want to come back to work because most of the renters, well, I don't want to say most, I want to say about 50% of the renters are facing evictions right now, to the point whereas in Milwaukee, one management company filed 68,000 evictions in 2 weeks. This is the eviction crisis that's going on right now. And so who can even mentally focus on working when they're trying to figure out where they're going to live when they get evicted, because the pending eviction is something that's going to happen. You have to, it's all about being equitable.